Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 33 of Radio Europa. Tonight I'm joined by Laura and Darth from the United Kingdom. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey.
We'll be discussing Britain's latest efforts to outcuck everybody else with its police force, as well as Macron's crusade against social media. But before we crack on with that, though, I'll hand over to Laura, who's going to cover a few of this week's most important news stories. So, Laura, if you will.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to start with Brexit and get it over with because everyone's sick of it now. But Theresa May has said that she is putting her agreement forward to another vote before next month. And if her deal fails, then there's two more votes following that. And the first one is to rule out a no-deal Brexit. And the second one is to request an extension over the process to leave the EU. So no idea what they're going to vote at this stage, but it's looking like we could extend our leave from the European Union. Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the Labour Party, is now openly backing a second referendum as well. News from Britain today. Facebook and Instagram have deleted Tommy Robinson's pages, suggesting that he broke their rules on organised hate. So this comes immediately after he exposed the BBC and Hope Not Hate as being willing to fabricate evidence in order to smear a political opponent. Eurovision, so competing countries are all trying to outdo each other with their Eurovision entries. So France have put forward a gay Moroccan Arab to represent them, and Italy have put forward an Italian Egyptian. So check out Defend Europa for more information about those two candidates. The yellow vests are still ongoing in France, so they've been going for 15 weeks now. Nothing new to report really. They're increasingly violent, and there's a lot of fights kicking off between the police and citizens, but 15 weeks now. And then in relation to LGBT stuff, in the Netherlands, a 10-year-old Dutch girl with two lesbian mothers and two homosexual fathers, you did hear that right, has pressured a comic book publisher to include a gay couple in its next issue of Donald Duck. And then in Sweden, a book promoting transsexuality to toddlers and preschoolers about a transgender man and his horse who claims to be a dog has been published in Sweden. And then also in Britain, primary school children, so that's children from the age of 5, are to be taught about gay and transgender relationships as part of compulsory lessons. The new curriculum will bring an end to parents' right to opt their children out of sex and relationships or education classes in secondary school. And that's all from me.
Well, thanks, Laura. I just wanted to add on that last point that there's been a petition in the United Kingdom against this new sex education legislation. At the last count, I think it's got about 107,000 signatures, and it was actually debated in Parliament yesterday. And if for any British people watching, I advise you to go and watch the debate, because you will see two things. The chairwoman of the debate, the opening speaker, is a typical lefty. She's a former teacher, and she's saying, you know, parents are bigoted and nobody knows what they're talking about. Only teachers know, and we have to promote tolerance, da-da-da-da. But then following her is a white middle-class, middle-aged conservative man. And you can see the fear in his face. He's standing there in front of the feminist Gestapo, and you can see the fear in his face. And he's so, you know, from his whole demeanor, he opposes the legislation, but he's so afraid of saying a wrong word. It's the most cowardly performance you will ever see, and it's just emblematic of our society at the moment. So if you have got a couple of hours to waste, go and watch the debate, and you'll see exactly what I mean. But anyway, I've got that out of the way. Just needed to say that. So I think we're going to move on to our topics, which are, of course, UK's police discriminatory hiring and Macron's social media ban. So if we start with the police issue first, I know, Laura, I think you've made a video about this yourself. You've been involved in the making of one. So do you want to just give a bit of background on this issue?
Yeah, there's quite a lot going on, actually. There's quite a lot to unpack. But basically, it started with Sky News last week reported that London's police force wants to represent the ethnic breakdown of London. So at the moment, only 14% of police officers are non-white, but over 40% of London's population are non-white. So they want to basically set up these diversity quotas so that they can make the police force 40% non-white as well. And they're going to hire an additional 250 non-white police officers a year to try and get that number up. And then 3 days later, Sarah Thornton, who is the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, said that as well as doing that, they should also be able to positively discriminate in favour of non-white recruits. And this was what she said. Otherwise, the ranks of officers will be too white for decades to come. So she's not just wanting to hire those additional 250 police officers, they're also discriminating against white people that apply for the job as well. And then on top of that, Sarah Thornton, as some of you may be aware, was one of the senior police officers that was involved in the Oxford grooming gang scandal. So she just failed to stop. There was 300 girls in Oxford. Some of them were as young as 11 years old, and they were sold into prostitution and raped and sexual violence and all sorts of horrible things. And she was one of the chief officers who downplayed it, said that the girls were promiscuous and pretty much brought it on themselves. And then after the story broke, she refused to stand down, and she just instead said sorry to the victims and their families. And she's just been promoted to, she's now the lead in charge of human trafficking in Britain. So not only is she trying to force these diversity quotas in London, but she's now been promoted to a position which is pretty much what she failed to stop in Oxford as well. So yeah, the police force is just crazy in Britain. There's just new stories coming out every day.
And it's sinister stuff, really, when you can be discriminated against in terms of employment in your own country, where you're still a majority, or so we're led to believe. But I'm just thinking, just to play devil's advocate on this one, and maybe I don't want to say give these people the benefit of the doubt, but just try and see it from their point of view. Do you think that there's an element of, so they've recognised clearly that ethnic minorities in the UK really just don't respect the police, and they feel like they're being picked on and so on and so forth. Do you think there's an element of the police trying to neutralise that accusation and that criticism by having ethnic minorities policing other ethnic minorities?
Yeah, well, this all comes from the Macpherson report, which was a report in 1999, which follows the death of Stephen Lawrence. So usually when people are murdered to do with knife crime and gun crime in Britain, it's usually a black person killing another black person, or a black person killing a white person. But they managed to find this example where it was a white person killing a black person, and it's Stephen Lawrence. I'm sure you've all heard of him. He's a saint. His mother got put into the House of Lords. It's been completely propagandized for the last 2 decades. And this Macpherson report, which Jack Straw commissioned, by the way, one to look up on Wikipedia, it's put all these rules in place saying that the police are racist, so we need these diversity quotas. And it says things like the police should now be able to investigate non-crimes as well as crimes. So it's just this really crazy report. And I think I think partly people are scared of offending, so they're just going along with it. But I think there's something a little bit more sinister at play, to be honest. I think there is an ethnic replacement going on here, and I don't think they're so stupid that they don't know it's going to happen. I think they're facilitating it.
Yeah, it's there's definitely an element of that, and I think what they're looking to do, the same as they're doing with the royal family, is to modernise it. And I say modernise euphemistically. What I mean is they are altering the institutions so that they reflect the fact that we're being replaced, basically. Darth, what do you think about this police episode? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Oh, where to start? First of all, I don't think that I know that the police aren't the only ones that are discriminating. It's happening everywhere. Whether or not it's openly done. I was talking to a friend recently in regard to the fire brigade, and there was a group of guys who were taken in to work as firemen, and they were told, the ones going through the recruitment process in their training, they're said, right, you guys aren't going to be put onto our Twitter page because you're too white. There's too many white people in this intake, so we don't want to put you guys up on Twitter because it'll appear that we're discriminating again. So there's that. There's obviously all the things that were going on with the BBC hiring for only one for no white people. The British Transport Police were holding recruitment days for information, and they were putting it out to minorities, so giving the impression that white people weren't welcome to attend these things. It's just that the police have come out formally and said that they would like, or somebody in the police has come out formally and said that they want to have this written into law. You know, it's just some of the stuff that, you know, Thornton's been quoted in saying. Like, I think that there's an argument that we could select on merit and put people into a pool, brackets, of recruits, and then appoint on representation. You know, so they would hire, you know, put into pools of people and then say, right, we'll pick what people fit our racial agenda. And what frustrates me the most is you're just not going to get a decent police force from this. I don't care, you know, what steps you take to try and make things equal representation. You hire the best person for the job, and that's in any field. You don't hire, you know, depending on what your color of your skin is, or what sex you are, or, you know, what sexual orientation you are. You hire the best person for the job. And if you do that, then your organization will perform optimally. If you're hiring people based on the color of their skin alone, you're going to have a huge decline in performance and the ability to carry out its basic jobs.
Yeah, and I think given what we know about IQ and general population trends, I think we can safely say that the problem is we have a meritocracy. Well, we did have a meritocracy, and a meritocracy produced a police force that was whiter than the country at large. So it stands to reason that any effort to manipulate that recruitment process on a racial basis will, to disadvantage white people, will create a poorer police force. And that's the same in any walk of life. I mean, I'm just thinking about back to a BBC job advertisement last year, I think it was, where they specifically said, basically, if you're white, don't apply. Or it wasn't even that. It was, if you're white British, if you're indigenous, don't apply. But if you're, you know, some Romanian dude, or you're from India, or you're black, then yeah, you know, the job's yours. Or if you're gay or a woman or whatever. But given that there are so many cases of this, I mean, I don't know what you guys think about this, but do you sense that just from the people you talk to and whatnot, that there is some kind of anger about this in the general public?
Yeah, I do, but I don't think we take them anywhere near as seriously enough as we should do, because people see a diversity quota and then they'll write a couple of tweets and moan about it. But this is so serious because diversity quotas don't just stop at a magical number. So it's not going to get to 80% white, 20% non-white, and then it's like, okay, let's stop with the diversity quotas. It keeps going until one day we're a minority in our own country, and then they're like, okay, 51% of parliament have to be black. And then suddenly we don't have power anymore. And you mentioned the BBC one, which was one from last year. Also, the NHS have diversity quotas because there are lots of non-white people that work in the NHS, but they work in the lower skilled jobs. So they're trying to bump them up to senior positions in the NHS. How scary is that, having like doctors based on diversity quotas? Also, the army have diversity quotas at the moment. They want 13% of people in the army to be non-white to represent the general public, which is why you're seeing all those crazy adverts of Muslims praying in battlefields, and you know, is it one of a lesbian couple or a gay couple or something? And also another story from last week, they want to bump up the grades of black people in universities because they're not getting the same grades as white people. So it's never ending, and it's just terrifying because there's nothing that we can do about it, really. We just need to keep kicking off about it and making sure that everybody knows about it. But there just seem to be more and more diversity quotas every single week.
Now, can I interject in here? I don't think, and if you did, I apologise. There is one positive outcome from this story dropped yesterday or the day before. There's a guy, a 25-year-old male, had applied for the police in Cheshire, Matthew Furlong, and he was basically knocked back from being able to join the police force because he's a white and heterosexual, and believes many other men will have been discriminated against. And he said, had I lied in my interview form and said that I was bisexual, for instance, there's a strong possibility that I would be working for the Cheshire police now, based on a lie. And I think, I don't know. I hope that some action is going to be taken here. He said there was a tribunal decision was found in his favour. So hopefully this is the beginning of, you know, some kind of return to common sense, that you cannot discriminate. Because one thing that I don't think has been mentioned in this conversation tonight is positive discrimination is not positive. Positive discrimination is another word for racism. So what these people are trying to say is it's okay to be racist as long as we're racist against certain people, i.e. the majority of the population, white people. It's okay to be racist against them as long as we're not discriminating against the minorities, because that would be wrong. But I don't understand how we've gone from we shouldn't discriminate against people to it's okay to discriminate against people as long as they're white people.
Yeah, it's I mean, they use that weird logic, don't they? They have this woke leftist take where, you know, you can't allegedly you can't be racist to white people because white people are the oppressors, or some nonsense like that. But I think most sensible people recognize that, you know, racial prejudice is racial prejudice, whichever way you stitch it up. It just is. And I hope what you're saying is correct about a return to sanity, because I don't know about you guys, but diversity quotas in the health service fucking terrifies me, because, you know, that's when stuff gets real. You know, you're thinking about operating theatres and anaesthetists, and yeah, you don't want incompetent diversity hires doing that job for you. It just ain't safe. Oh, I was going to add something else on this, and I totally skipped my mind. I read something funny in the comments, but never mind. Before we move on, do you guys have anything else you want to add to this topic?
I have one final thing.
Go ahead.
Sarah Thornton said that what's going on is that the police are prioritising other white people when they're hiring, and she was saying that it's, you know, having those natural reactions to your own race is bad, and she's saying that that's racist and that's what we need to counter. But then if it's bad to have natural reactions towards your own people, then why are they doing these diversity quotas in the first place? Because isn't that just black people having stronger feelings towards black officers? So it's the very thing that she's trying to kind of counter, if that makes sense. And we're always told that race is a social construct and it doesn't exist and we're all just the same. So why do we need black police officers if we're all just the same? If it's a social construct, just make the white police officers like construct into what we need them to be. It's just, there's so many levels of hypocrisy regarding what she's saying.
And ultimately, what's to stop people from going into an interview and, you know, a white guy, 25 years old, walks into an interview and says, oh, I identify as a female. I'm a black female. You know, and in today's logic, in today's politically correct environment, I imagine that somebody would get away with doing that. You know, if they turn around and said, no, you're not, they'll say, well, prove that I'm not, because that is what is happening. You know, people, I guarantee you, are lying on their application forms and saying that they're part of a different religion or part of a different sexual orientation simply so that they will get an interview. They might not even get the job, but it's just so they can get their foot in the door. Yeah,
quite possibly. I mean, it's something that I would consider doing. I mean, I'm fortunate that I'm not, you know, having to apply for anything at the moment. But if I was, that is what I would be doing. I would say I was a gay Jew or something like that. I'd be more likely to get an interview. But I've got to say, just on what Laura was saying, if you're ever debating this point with leftists or liberals or whatever, this is a really good point to get them on, because what Laura said is absolutely accurate. That, you know, you can't. The following two arguments are incompatible. You can't say on the one hand race is a social construct, it doesn't exist. Oh, but on the other hand, you know, we're going to advocate racial identitarianism for blacks. It's like either it doesn't exist for blacks either, or we can have it. And then you force them into a position where they have to either contradict you and then themselves in the process, or accept your premise. So I think it's a really good point. And sorry, Dan, do you want to add?
When in the last couple of years have a blatant contradiction in arguments ever stopped people from pushing those arguments? I mean, the argument I make right now is, you know, on one hand, people say that you shouldn't be held to account for the sins of your forefathers. So to jump across the pond, people are arguing that people should be allowed to enter into America, or children should be allowed to enter into America or stay in America as illegal citizens and shouldn't be held to account for what their parents have done. But on the same breath, you've got 3 American presidential Democratic, not nominees, but people who are running for the Democratic nomination are saying that they would support race-based reparations because, we should be paying the families or the descendants of the victims of slavery for what happened to them. We should be giving them money. And you're like, well, how can you argue on one hand that we shouldn't be held to account for the sins of our fathers, and then in exactly the same breath say, but we should hold people to account for the sins of their fathers? And like you said, and I agree with you, you force them into a corner where they're contradicting themselves. But that is what, the left and the politically correct corners of politics is constantly doing. It's just, they're just walking contradictions in everything that they stand for.
Well, that's certainly true, and I don't think that's all particularly negative, because they highlight themselves as being morons in anybody with some intelligence, so that's useful. But as well, I guess it opens the door to say, well, you're right that we shouldn't be held to account for the sins of our forebears, but at the end of the day, if you're going to go down that route and advocate that blacks deserve one thing because they as a race experience something, then that's got to apply to everybody. And I think normal thinking people recognize that white people of European heritage have the right to self-determination, just as blacks have the right to whatever they have the right to.
Yeah, and the last thing I would say on this is, I said to a friend the other day when I first read that article, I was raging, and what I said to my friend was, I'm sorry, but 2 wrongs do not make a right. Okay, people may have been discriminated, or people have been discriminated against in the past, but turning around and discriminating against another group of people does not right the wrongs of the past discrimination. That's not how these things work.
Yeah, of course, that's true, and it's like in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, there's an argument about this where I think a group of Israelis wanted to poison the water. I think they did poison the water supply where some German prisoners of war were being held, and there was a debate in their community whether 2 wrongs make a right. But of course, they don't. Once an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, as they say. So. Laura, do you have anything else to add on this particular topic before we move on?
No, I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we've, keep talking about it in the comments, because it is a good topic, and hopefully people listen to this and get our perspective. But we're going to move on to the next topic tonight, which is we're going to go over the channel to France. Emmanuel Macron has suddenly decided he wants to take radical measures against people who commit hate crimes, quote unquote, on social media. So Darth, I believe you've been looking into this one. Do you want to give us a quick rundown on what's going on here?
Sure. So basically the main topic, or the main issue here, is Emmanuel Macron has suggested that anyone who has been convicted of, quote, hate speech should lose access to social media platforms for life. French president brought the online censorship idea up at an annual dinner for the Representative Council of Jewish Institutions in France, stating that a new way to tackle online hate speech should be tabled for May. Quote, the European fight must continue, but it's too slow, Macron said, comparing those convicted of hate speech to football hooligans banned from attending football matches. France is set to embed regulatory and Facebook to examine how effectively the social networks tackle hate speech, and this is according to Breitbart. So ultimately what they're saying is if you have been convicted of any kind of hate speech, you will no longer be allowed to use social media for, it would seem, the rest of your life. The new proposal has obviously brought up of criticism. French journalist Gabrielle Robin, who said the proposal could lead to anti-establishment voices such as mass migration critic Eric Zemmour, being excluded from social media. Quote, never, I repeat, ever has a liberal government taken so many repressive measures. Macron and other globalist politicians have continued to push for increasing laws and regulations to combat hate speech and so-called fake news online. So it would seem that this is the latest step in European governments to try and silence anybody who criticises their rhetoric and points of view on how politics should be walking in what direction.
It's quite radical, really, because what they're essentially proposing is a life sentence of sorts, not custodially, but you know, if you're banned from social media for life because you've committed a crime that may or may not have been aided with social media, that you're frozen out of public discourse in that way, because that's increasingly where any political discourse is held, is social media, and to freeze people out of that is rather repressive. My question on this, though, is how do they? I mean, I'm not sure if it's covered anywhere, but how would they even enforce this? Because with VPNs and whatnot, it's not difficult to conceal your identity online.
Well, yeah, you're right. I wonder about this as well. I mean, in the UK right now, if you're charged with an offence, especially in Scotland, you can be given bail conditions not to do certain things. So the court may say to you're not allowed to access the internet, or you're not allowed to have electronic device on you that has access to the internet, or you're not allowed to speak to certain people. So they can impose bail conditions, and if they then get any information that you're in breach of those bail conditions, you could then be rearrested for kind of further checks on your bail conditions if they are stringent enough or if you're adhering to them. But yeah, you're right that it's going to be very difficult to enforce properly. But, you know, I think that this is more of an excuse of just, you know, we'll do it first for people who have been convicted of hate speech. But once we just see people in France using hate speech in any sense of the word which we deem to be hate speech, you'll just be banned from social media. And if we can prove that you are accessing it, then you'll just be shut down time and time again. But, you know, like you said, with social media becoming the ground in which people have debates now, especially with people being afraid to voice their opinions in public, you're effectively saying to people, you can no longer take part in political discussions, because if they've made it in such a way that you're afraid to speak in public to a fellow human being in person, your only other option then is to access online. And if you can't access online, you're effectively frozen out of society.
Yeah, it's a challenging one because, as you said, you know, well, as we both said, that social media is increasingly the place where discourse is held, and the fact that so many people use it, it would be like banning somebody from using a telephone, and that would be considered extremely repressive. You know, that's really dictating who can and can't communicate with you, and that's, I think that definitely goes beyond the pale in terms of what is acceptable law and order policies. Interestingly, see, hate speech has been a thing in Europe for a couple of years now. Ever since the migrant crisis, there's been a lot of hysteria about, you know, you can't say these mean things about Muslims or about immigrants or whatever. But this seems to be in response to a very specific kind of hate crime. Laura, do you know what I'm alluding to here?
Are you talking about anti-Semitism?
I am talking about anti-Semitism. It seems to me that Macron has only decided on this measure because some Jewish groups have complained that they're facing increased anti-Semitism from the yellow vests.
Yeah, well, the conversation that they had was let's have a look. It took place at the annual dinner of the Representative Council of Jewish Institutions in France. So the bill is being floated at a time where Jews are facing rising levels of real-life anti-Semitism attacks, driving whole communities out of French cities. So yeah, it seems to be aimed around anti-Semitism, but I just think that this is where we're heading, to be honest, because in Britain we have the craziest hate speech laws. I know we talk about them a lot, but It's only if you show hostility towards somebody by even just showing that you dislike somebody, or excuse me, or insulting language, or somebody else just perceives that you're doing that, then that can be a hate crime. And the stuff that they're arresting people for, misgendering people, or just not agreeing with certain pronouns or whatever, it's just incredibly scary, I think. And obviously we're very active online, and the alt-right played a huge part in Trump's presidential election in 2016. If you look at the polls as well, it's always the numbers are always getting higher and higher and higher. For people like, there was one done by Hope Not Hate, wasn't there, during the State of Hate report last week, where a third of people in the country think that Islam is incompatible with our life or something. And I think that they're just trying to, they know that we're active online, and I think that they're just trying to silence people, but I'm not sure how they're going to implement it. I'm just reading an article, and it's saying that they might track your IP address on Twitter, and then Twitter can send it to authorities in France, and then they can just shut you down from the internet. Yeah, it's Orwell stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And the interesting thing about it, though, is the fact that in France, the anti-Semitism is increasing in France, but it's not French people. This is the big dilemma here, because the law will overwhelmingly affect French people talking about immigration, of course, but in terms of anti-Semitism in France, that's been mostly perpetrated by new French, Muslim, North African, Maghrebi type, those kind of French, quote unquote. So ironically, the policies that Macron would advocate, massive immigration from the third world and so on and so forth, is what's causing the anti-Semitism he's now looking at and trying to solve. So I think the liberal leaders on these issues show a great lack of self-awareness, because they don't realize that their own policies have tied them up in a knot.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't really have anything else to add, but there's always articles coming out at Breitbart about Muslims being against Jews, and they just dislike each other, don't they? And they're just fighting all the time.
Have we discussed the definition of anti-Semitism that is being kind of worked on right now within Europe?
No, but it might be worth doing.
Without getting our YouTube channel suspended, please.
Well, you read out ultimately what is written online. Have either of you got the link up right now for it?
Yeah, I've got the link up.
Do you want to read out some of them?
Yeah. Okay. So the working definition of anti-Semitism, and this is from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. So it starts off with things like, obviously, aiding, justifying the killing or harming of Jews, which is fair enough, I think. But then it talks about things like accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoings committed by a single Jewish person or group. So I think that pretty much means noticing coincidences. And then it says denying the fact, scope, mechanisms or intentionality of the genocide of the Jewish people in the Holocaust. Accusing the Jews as a people or Israel as a state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust. This one's interesting. Accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations. That's an interesting one, because a lot of Jewish people do openly say that they support Israel over their own nation. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavour. And then there's loads more stuff, like using the symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism to characterise Israel or Israelis. But there's loads of headings. There's about 15 headings. In fact, I'll get Neil to post it in the chat so people can read it.
Well, I tell you what, that reads like a list written by a paranoid schizophrenic. I've never known so many different definitions for racism. That is quite remarkable, really.
It's because eventually there will be somebody or someone will be implicated in a crime who happens to be Jewish. Legislation going to protect them simply because people will simply view it as anti-Semitic, even if it's blatantly obvious that they have broken the law or done wrong, will this legislation prevent them from being prosecuted?
Well, I get the impression that already happens in a way, maybe not in that direct way, like you said, but in that, somebody knows somebody who knows somebody who looks out for a protected class, for instance. That I'm sure that is something that certain minority groups are already being treated differently. So, and positively, I mean, not negatively. So, I'm sure that could happen, which is quite concerning, really. But I think overall the definition is clearly way too broad. And if Macron brings in those social media rules to combat anti-Semitism on social media, then they're going to have to ban like every member of the French Communist Party, all of Mélenchon's supporters, half of Marine Le Pen's support. There'll be hardly any French people left on social media if they adopt that. But
let's be honest. There's probably a reason why it's written so broadly. It's so that they can cover so many bases. I mean, like talking about the UK hate speech laws, if somebody perceives something to be racist, Islamophobic, disableist, homophobic, etc., if they report that to the police will investigate it, and whether or not a crime is found to have been committed, it will still be recorded as a hate incident. So if somebody says, somebody gets their window smashed and they say, oh, I perceive that I had my window smashed because I'm black, it will be recorded as a hate incident, even if there's no proof that it was a racistly linked crime. It's written in such a way that there doesn't need to be proof for it to be recorded as discriminatory or hateful.
Well, this is exactly what's going to happen. And to go back to your law and order example in your previous section, you can see a situation where a Jewish person legitimately, or no, rather illegitimately, commits a crime. He gets accused of said crime, and then he says, hang on, you're just accusing me because I'm Jewish, and then he gets away with it. So that's exactly what is going to happen, because somebody perceives or allegedly perceives that accusation is because of their ethnic status, not because they've actually committed the crime.
Well, look at what happened to Jussie Smollett, and I'm glad it did happen, that he's been prosecuted for it, but he effectively staged a false hate crime against himself. Ultimately, I think so you could get a pay rise for his role in Empire, but he went out of his way to create a false crime committed against himself, which was of a racial nature, so that he could get attention and thereafter pressure people into giving him, brownie points for being a victim. Being a victim pays in today's society.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, just look at the climate of reparations, and it's in every Western country. You've got people of minority communities that look at David Lammy in the UK, for instance. They demand reparations for this, and people are still making demands of the German government, the French government over Algeria, and it just seems like, I'm sure somebody somewhere has demanded reparations because we used to criminalize homosexuals. So the victim mentality in the West today is really, really quite strong, and it is the way you get on in life now. You don't work hard, you don't succeed, you be a victim, and you'll go further than anybody else.
Sometimes as well, just to mention something about, because you mentioned my nemesis David Lammy, he and many other non-white people always say, you're just doing that because I'm black, even when it's nothing to do with the race. Because the other day people were calling him out for his expenses. Have you seen his expenses? They're like 150 to 200 grand a year. He's one of the highest. It's ridiculous, the stuff that he's been spending expenses on. And somebody called him out, and he replied by saying, why are you saying that to me? Because I'm black. And he's like, you've got this stereotypical image of an untrustworthy black person in your head. And nobody said anything to do with him being black. So imagine if they went to the police and said, oh, this person's doing this because I'm black, or because I'm Jewish, or because I'm gay, or whatever. That would have to be investigated by the police, because that person is perceiving you, whether honestly or not, to be discriminating against them because of their race.
And then when you've got hysterical people, like there was a guy in America who has been found to have burned his house down and killed, I think, several of his pets because he was angry that he couldn't find someone or something that was discriminating against a group of people. So he's decided, I can't find anything that's discriminatory, so I'm going to burn my house down.
That's just ridiculous.
I swear to you that happened. I'll see if I can find the link and we can post it out, but it's beyond belief.
That's so funny. We're just going to burn my house down to own the racists. No, I think the victim mentality of today is ridiculous, and David Lammy in particular, he's very adept at using this card. Diane Abbott's not quite so bad anymore, but David Lammy he's really, you know, on Twitter every day. He's like, it's always about the interests of black people, Africans. Never he mentions his constituents as a token, you know, remark. There's some platitudes here and there, but generally speaking, all of his tweets, all of his comments in Parliament, they all seem to be, or he gives the impression that they're all about being black. Man.
And this, you know, David Lammy, this kind of links. This will link onto one of the questions that's been asked but he's one of the people who are calling loudest that Tommy Robinson should have been banned a long time ago from various social media sites and that we haven't done enough. I'll read out his tweet about Tommy Robinson being banned from Facebook. He says, "This is the right decision, but far too slow. Tommy Robinson has been allowed to generate a huge following and revenue through spreading divisive Islamophobic bile. We should regulate Facebook and others to make sure that they act much faster to prevent this." So ultimately they're saying is, you know, we need to make sure that we are stopping people from expressing points of view regardless of their tone. And the way hate speech laws and views are going is before long it will be anything that goes against the political narrative will be viewed as hate speech.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely the way it's going.
Lammy's constituency is 80% non-white. That's why he's elected every election. And if you go look at his Twitter, all he talks about are Grenfell Tower and Windrush, and obviously they're two events to do with non-white people. So that's like his token. That's his personality. That's his priority, and he's very open about the fact that he prioritises black people over white people. But we could never do that in response.
Well, he basically, yeah, I've got to be careful to say it because no doubt some dickhead will accuse me of slander. But basically, David Lammy, he gives the impression that he's a black nationalist, which is really odd to be a black nationalist in the UK. But anyway, I think what we're going to do now is, Darth mentioned a question from the audience. And I think if you've got any questions for us from the audience, can you please make sure you tag our Twitter account so that we can collect them all and then we'll answer them. I think we'll start with something that somebody asked a little earlier in the show, which was Tenebris Anima. Did you see Panodrama with Tommy? Your reactions? ? Oh, and by the way, I think I said Twitter account. Tag the YouTube account, not the Twitter account. You guys know what I meant. But anyway, I've watched about a quarter of that Panodrama with Tommy, and it's really uncomfortable to watch because the BBC look like fools, and it is really uncomfortable, but it's good.
I watched it all yesterday evening, and I would encourage all of you to watch it if you get a chance, because I think there was a group of people who claimed responsibility for having Tommy's Facebook and Instagrams taken down, and I think they're then going to speak to Google about getting his YouTube account disabled, and that video has been uploaded on his YouTube account, so I'd watch it now if you get the chance. But yeah, basically, Tommy Robinson conducted a sting operation against Panorama to prove that they were out to get him, and basically inventing stories so that they could slander him and destroy his life more so than it already has been. And he's caught them at it, and then went to the Panorama studio, wherever they were filming the documentary, to interview him, and he's basically confronted them with all this evidence, and they've not got a leg to stand on ultimately. And he's caught the main guy making several kind of slurs racist slurs, homophobic slurs, which the guy is trying to pass off as jokes. But we all know that if anybody on the wrong parts of political landscape made those comments themselves, they would instantly have their life destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, the documentary is certainly really damning from what I've seen and from what I've heard. And I think the BBC Panorama presenter, John Sweeney, has come out of this looking like a total prat. Because, as you said, he made comments that if we'd be in big trouble. But as well, he made comments which seem to be pretty common in the London metropolitan milieu, which is the fact that, I mean, he said some really horrible things. Like he said that working class people were like cannibals and aliens from outer space, you know. And this is a guy who purports to make documentaries that the ordinary people can, you know, we can get an insight into power structures and whatnot, when really people like John Sweeney are the very epitome of power structures, and he really is a contemptible swine. So if you do come across the documentary, make sure you share it as far as possible, because the biggest thing is awareness, and this is what we need to make people aware of. So we've got some more questions come in. The one I could just send on the screen now from Piers Taylor. We're all looking forward to Angela Merkel's departure from German politics, but I heard a rumour that she's likely to be appointed as president of the European Commission, replacing Jean-Claude Juncker. Personally, I believe she should be put on trial for treason. Yeah. Do any of you have any information on this? Laura, have you heard anything about this?
No, I haven't. I know that she said that she would be stepping down by, was it 2021? Is that when the next election is? God knows what they're lining up for the German people. But I'm not sure. I mean, politicians tend to make more money once they've retired, don't they? So, and she's a huge name. She's the de facto leader of the EU. So I'm not sure if she'll, you know, write a book or start doing speeches or something. But hopefully she'll just get the hell out of the EU, because she's awful.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's one of the worst things when former prime ministers, look at Juncker, for instance, go on to be, you know, they go on to get some cushy job in the European Union, because they just take the policies that got them kicked out of power in their own countries, they just implement them on a continent-wide level, and it's just not right.
I'm going to imagine that she's going to want to try and kind of follow through on a lot of the stuff that she's implemented, and we are better to do that than in the European Union. Tony Blair, I think he's very much still active kind of behind the curtain. I wonder if he's got something to do with this kind of break off of this independent group of MPs that have resigned from Labour and the Tories. So yeah, certainly I think she will take up some kind of role in politics after she leaves the German government, and it wouldn't surprise me if she does, you know, go into the European Union as a whole.
Well, just on that point you mentioned about Tony Blair being involved with the independent group, which, by the way, is a private company, so it doesn't have to disclose its financial backers. But George Galloway did some good work on this on Twitter, and he exposed Blair's involvement as a financier and political supporter of the independent group. So if anybody's interested in that. We've got some more questions on here that have come through from Xanth Velaset. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but anyway. Will you all be joining protest actions if Brexit doesn't happen? Yes, personally. What about you guys?
Yeah, I'll join them. I think the reason why it always looks like there's more Remainers at the protests, first of all, is because the media are extremely biased, but also because they always hold the protests in London, which is a complete Remainer hub, and they also often hold them on weekdays when, you know, us Northerners are at work and stuff. So, but I think if this does happen with Brexit, then yeah, I think that there will be a huge reaction, and I will definitely travel down to London to protest with everybody else.
Darth, what about you? Do you fancy joining a Brexit protest?
I would enjoy doing it. However, I'm working all the time, like Laura's saying. You know, I don't really get a lot of time off during the week. So it would need to be the weekend. So yeah, if there's going to be a protest organised, I'll certainly try and get myself down there. It's a bit of a journey, but I'll certainly do my best.
Great stuff. So we've got another question from Pyramid Builder Jr. What fraction of Germans are conservative? I know AfD is nationalistic, but what other parties are right-leaning? Well, obviously none of us are German, so we're not as in tune as we could be. But I'd say, from what I know of German politics, that the Angela Merkel's CDU are nominally conservative, but they're more like liberals. The other conservative force are their sister party in Bavaria, the CSU, the Christian Social Union, who they are legitimately conservative. They're not perfect, but they are conservatives. And then you've got AfD. So all told, probably about 20 to 25%, you know, rising up to about 35% in Bavaria. But it's really hard to say beyond those basic overview statistics. I don't know if anybody else has got an opinion on the conservatism of Germany.
The AfD are a very good party from what I've read about them. And I went to a conference last year, and a politician from the AfD, I'm not going to name him, but he gave a speech there. And he openly said that they hold back a lot with what they say publicly because they know that they need to shift the Overton window. So the AfD, they're much better than like UKIP that we've got in Britain and the Sweden Democrats in Sweden. But they were polling in second place last year, weren't they? They were around 17, 18%, I think. So, yeah, the AfD are pretty good, I think.
Yeah, they were certainly up there. And I think they're likely to supplant the SPD if, you know, these migration policies continue. So we've got another question. Are the Irish nationalistic, or have they... okay, I'm sure there's meant to be another part of that question, but we'll just answer the first part. Are the Irish nationalistic? Darth, what do you think?
Depends on what bit of Ireland you're talking about. Obviously, Southern Ireland are very much kind of the opinion that, you know, all Ireland should be Irish. I think there is still very much a view of a nationalistic Ireland, but I think, unfortunately, especially Southern Ireland is guilty of what's happening in Britain and along the west of, you know, we need to bring in large numbers of migrants and foreign people to prop up our population. And I think the Southern Irish government had laid out plans for the next, I think it was like 25 years or something, to move around a million foreign nationals into Ireland to ensure that its population stays solvent. Forgive me if I've got the wrong figures there, but I remember listening to a podcast or YouTube video on that relatively recently.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's the Ireland 2040 agenda, and I'm just noticing that. Sorry, Pyramid Builder, we missed the second half of your question where you asked, or have they become leftist tards like Catalans? And actually, I would say that Irish nationalism, as it exists in the mainstream, tends to be like Catalan nationalism. It's basically left wing and egalitarian and whatnot. So, yeah, what Darth said basically, they have a strong belief in a united Ireland, but it's not for Irish people necessarily. Next question, we've got Zero Schizo at DETV. Any other similar laws proposed like that of Macron's anti-Semitism in other European countries? I know there is a kind of a schism inside Poland about something similar. I personally don't know about Poland's laws, but I know that, well, for instance, anti-Semitism is illegal in most countries on the continent, well, some countries on the continent. So, but I don't really know after that. What about you, Laura? Or Darth, whichever.
Sorry. Well, certain aspects of quote-unquote anti-Semitism, such as questioning certain facts about the Holocaust, is illegal pretty much all over Europe, isn't it? And it's not illegal in Britain, because if you want to in Britain, you can say that the Holocaust didn't happen, but there are other loopholes in the law that they can use to get you. So, for example, Alison Chablos, who was arrested and she was sentenced to a year in prison, but then it was reduced to a 2-year suspended sentence. She sung songs on the internet about the Holocaust. And even though it's not illegal for her to do that in Britain, they used a loophole and said that her songs were grossly offensive. And then she was convicted of doing it like that. So they can twist the law anywhere if that's what they want to do.
Well, look at Count Dankula.
Yeah, another one.
So yeah, if you know any issues in the UK, they can get round by basically saying that it's a hate crime. If it causes gross offence or is hateful towards a person or group of people, or if anybody finds it to be offensive and there's enough, you know, evidence to prove that a crime is there, then it will happen.
Yeah, certainly that's the case. And by the way, you mentioned Alison, Laura. Big respect for Alison Chablos, because she really faced a lot of grief for her songs, and they were just songs and they were funny, and she basically originally came at the Jewish question from a left-wing perspective, anti-Zionist perspective, and they really took her to the cleaners for it. And it's a shame, because what she did should be protected under freedom of speech, but sadly not.
Another thing as well is that they dragged it out for a few years, didn't they? So it wasn't actually the conviction which was the worst part of it. It was the fact that they just prolonged it again and again and again, and smeared her and dragged her through the media, and that's what they do. They do it on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. They don't just want to get a conviction. I don't even think that's their primary motive. I think their primary motive is to cause you as much personal upheaval and heartache as possible, and to cause you so much stress that you either kill yourself or you never ever dare criticize them again. So
and to set an example to other people that are watching.
Exactly, because then the rest of us are afraid to say anything similar, because we think, well, shit, we don't want to get what they got, obviously. So yeah, it's a very effective, if sinister, tactic. But anyway, I think I don't know if you guys have got any more issues to say on points to put out, sorry, on what the audience has been saying before I wrap up.
No, unless there's any other kind of pressing questions that have been asked in the chat.
Laura?
No, nothing from me.
Right, okay then, folks. I think that's all we'll cover today then. As always, if you've enjoyed today's show, please hit like and subscribe, share our channel, and consider donating to us so that we can continue to bring you content like this. The links are in the description below, and we're always grateful for any help you give us. And as ever, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.
See you later, guys.